Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Hi, and welcome to the New Commons. I'm John Michael Dumais, and my co-host is Johanna Laurie, and we'd like to talk to you more about free speech and censorship. So we talked about this last time in terms of the censorship industrial complex, and Josh, if you could post up the image of the censorship industrial complex for a couple of minutes. It's a pretty hefty image. But we talked about it last time, and it was a term coined by Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger. They're independent journalists who were among several who were invited to look at the Twitter files when Elon Musk took over Twitter, which is now called X. And the censorship industrial complex describes a vast network of government agencies, big tech corporations, civil society corporations, NGOs, media companies that are working in lockstep to control information flow. They came into being really after the 2016 election. There's a former State Department official I've been listening to on X called Mike Benz, named Mike Benz, who talks a lot about this. I really highly recommend BENZ. People check out his material, but I'm just going to go over a few of the items, that they have been known to be involved in. And again, these are kind of interlocking organizations. The first is the Global Engagement Center, which is founded in 2016 and funded by the State Department, U.S. State Department, and it supposedly leads government efforts to counter foreign propaganda and disinformation, but does have a pretty heavy footprint in domestic affairs because of that. Another group, Hamilton 68, that came into prominence in 2017. They were the ones who had this kind of Russian dashboard of people they claimed had been involved in Russian bots and other kinds of advertising on Facebook to inform or slant the election in 2016, and because they were around in late 2016, I think. Anyways, the findings from the Twitter files were that, in fact, most of the people they were targeting were Americans, and some of those accounts were actually fake. The third one is the Aspen Institute, which gets $140 million in contributions from the U.S. government and the State Department and USAID, which is the Agency for International Development, which is a propaganda organization. This particular organization hosted a table talk exercise in the summer of 2020 that addressed how to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop, which became known just a few weeks later. Because that was not allowed to be aired. It was censored during that election cycle. We don't know if that would have changed the outcome of the election, but that certainly could qualify as election interference. The Aspen Institute is closely aligned with other anti-disinformation organizations, including the State Department and the Stanford Internet Observatory, which is another federally funded project. And you wanted to mention?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I noticed in our Radically Rural Summit, which is happening this week, that the Aspen Institute is involved and has speakers who are, I believe, speaking on the journalism track. And so it would be a question. I mean, if I were going, which I don't have time to do, I would be listening for what they were saying, because all of these organizations have an international as well as a national interest in mind, and there are the agendas. And I just wonder if even on this local level, there are agendas that we should be aware of and that we should be questioning.
Indeed,
So-
yeah, it's happening right down the hall here.
So if you're
uh,
going, keep your feelers out. Right.
Another organization is called the Stanford Election Integrity Project. It was established in 2020 for that purpose, and it was created to fill the gap of what government, censors couldn't do, because the government can't technically censor. So this is how it's done: it's created this vast network of organization that it funds in order to do that, and this was one of among several organizations that were talking to Twitter and Facebook and saying, take down that post, whatever, and anything that questioned, for example, things like mail-in ballots, or whether whether there was fairness or accuracy in the election results, that was all essentially marginalized by them. I'll just cover this one other one here. The Center for Countering Digital Hate, that's a UK organization. They were the ones who created a disinformation dozen list, which included Children's Health Defense, RFK Jr., SARE-G and Green Med Info, Dr. Mercola, a bunch of others, and it was on account of that disinformation dozen. They then passed that information on to all of this whole network of people, and then they were responsible for censoring and deplatforming a lot of people during that time. I think RFK Jr. lost like 500,000 subscribers on one of his accounts.
And Mercola also had many subscribers.
Who?
Mercola, Dr.
Mercola, yes,
yeah.
no doubt.
Yeah.
And when the Center for Countering Digital Hate said that they were responsible for some huge percentage of misinformation online, in the social media sphere, and Facebook later did a review or an analysis, and they said that wasn't true. So again, this is just like certain players identifying people that counter their narrative, and they'll come up with a rationale, but there isn't really any good rationale.
But then when it gets picked up on, we don't hear the counter argument, because by then what's registered is what they're doing.
Exactly.
Not what the fact that Facebook comes up later and says it didn't find anything. That just goes in the trash file along with all the other.
Page B17
Right,
before
yeah.
you even read that.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you want to just show that image one more time of the censorship industrial complex, there's a URL on that image. And if people go to that URL, they can read about over 50 organizations, nonprofits, government organizations, think tanks, NGOs. It goes on and on, that were directly funded mostly by the government to do what the government can't do, which is censor viewpoints. And you may be aware of Missouri v. RFK Jr. v. Biden, I guess is what it is. It's Missouri v. Biden, was RFK Jr. and other plaintiffs. That particular lawsuit is actually going forward, where they're claiming that essentially that the government leaned on, pressured, and were directly involved with efforts to censor speech online, which is against the First Amendment. The government shall not abridge the First Amendment. There is one other organization that I'll point out that's part of this vast empire called the Public Good Project. I'm reading from a Midwestern doctor who's a great Substack author. I really highly recommend him. He is a doctor, but he goes by this alias, I guess, because he still wants to probably have a license. He recently wrote an article called "The Vast Pharmaceutical Conspiracy to Silence Dissent Online," and it covers what we covered some of that last time, I think. But he talks about that the pharmaceutical industry has essentially funded the Public Goods Project (PGP) and a lot of these other groups, which essentially were scouting the internet during COVID to quash anything having to do with alternative treatments like hydroxychloroquine, or people questioning the vaccine whether before or after it came out, people bringing up vaccine injuries, people questioning pretty much any aspect of the whole mandate protocol, which included lockdowns and masks and all that other stuff.
All these wonderful things that they call the public good, as if it were.
Don't you love this?
Yeah, I know.
Orwellian doublespeak.
Bubble speak, exactly.
And there was a sister initiative called Team Halo in the United Nations. Now, this particular Midwestern doctor has talked about them before, but their tactics continue. For example, they have been busy besmirching the name of Angela Woolbrecht, who's a nurse who came in and advocated for this patient who people may have heard about. This patient's name was Alexis Lorenz, a 23-year-old from Florida who suffered severe reactions after receiving multiple vaccines when she went to UCI Medical Center in California, and they told her, you have to take these vaccines before we'll work on your rare blood disorder. And she had this massive blow up, massive inflammation. Her whole head turned black. Her hair fell out. She had temporary blindness. Also, she couldn't hear well, and suffered from pain throughout her body, itching and burning sensation in her eyes, locked jaw, vomiting, all of these things. And they're besmirching this woman who came in to advocate for her. It's like, you can't have anyone advocating for an alternative viewpoint, which, again, the silence doesn't serve anyone. Everyone deserves to know. So anyway, I highly recommend people go out and check our last video, and also check out information about the censorship industrial complex, because, man, it is a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think, first of all, I'm just going to reiterate what we say in our Constitution, because if we stuck with this, we don't let them, we don't dilute this in any way, we will have a very strong support. We say the Congress shall make no law, this is the First Amendment, abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. It's very simple, and everybody thinks, well, maybe that's too simple, but what this does is it actually prevents the government from taking away this right.
You mean the government doesn't give us the right?
Well,
isn't that what they're saying?
Yeah. Well, they're saying it can't take it away. That we have it. We can't take it away. Yeah. Now, compare this, for instance, to what the Constitution is in the UK, because there it's based on common law, which is developed over the centuries, and they're saying essentially in UK law that citizens have free speech, but unless the government decides to take it away. So there's this loophole, and so, for instance, there are laws already limiting free speech there. There's laws that threaten, if you threaten or there's abusive speech, there's a law against that. Sending grossly offensive messages, there's a law against that. Incitement to racial or religious hatred, glorifying terrorism, obscenity and indecency, defamation. So, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail later as to how it's affecting the current time, because all of these laws are coming under scrutiny, both in Great Britain and here and other countries, as to what we really have as far as free speech is concerned and what the government can take away from us. So, but just realize that we have a law which is stronger in many ways than in lots of other countries, in fact, perhaps any other. So we need to, before we start taking it apart or diluting it or saying, as recently there was an article in our local, well, this was not a local article, but it was printed in our local paper about Musk's supremely flawed freedom of speech absolutism. And in this, what the person is advocating for here is cutting back on free speech, because after all, what you can say online may cause all kinds of harms and whatnot. We'll talk about that more later too. But I mean, it's constantly being eroded right now in the public sphere, and by institutions which should be protecting it. So this is something we really have to think very carefully about before we let them get away with this.
Indeed.
So yeah. So. Yeah, did you want to
Well, I was going
move
to
on
ask you if you wanted to mention Jonathan Turley's point of view.
Yes.
From his quotation.
Yes. There's a wonderful book that's just out that John Michael has read, and I haven't yet, but I intend to, called Free Speech, what's the Indispensable Right in an age of rage.
Yeah, free speech in an age of rage.
In
yeah.
an age of rage,
Yeah.
and he looks back historically at how we enshrined free speech in our Constitution, and then we began picking away at it, even historically, in terms of sedition and various things in which they thought, well, maybe we can't allow that or we can't allow that. But let's read. So he says is free speech fortifies the other 4 First Amendment freedoms. Religious freedom includes the right to profess one's faith, as well as the right not to profess other faiths or any faith at all. A free press keeps citizens knowledgeable about the news and circulates opinions and ideas. The freedoms of assembly and petition enable citizens to communicate among themselves and express their concerns to the government. So free speech is the cornerstone of the whole thing, because without this, you haven't got the other ones.
Yeah, everything else becomes eroded.
Yeah.
As we saw, a lot of those feats, those rights were eroded during COVID, and we'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you chip away at one, and it's the slippery slope argument.
There you go. Yeah.
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 So we're going to talk about just as Johanna said, there's just been this incredible push lately from many different quarters to rein in free speech by many world leaders and organizations.
Well, Turley says that too. He says that this era is the greatest attack on free speech that's ever been, as far as he can see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about Israel and Ukraine a bit?
Well, yeah. What I wanted to say about that was that Israel and Ukraine are both wars in which we are not directly involved, but indirectly involved. But we're very heavily involved in these wars. And in matters of war and peace, the opinions of every citizen, this is existential situation for us and for the world. It would seem to me that we should not in any way curtail people's ability to talk about this and actually have a robust discussion at the local level as well, because how can we trust our elected officials to do what we want them to do in terms of these big situations if we're not involved, if we're not talking about this, and if we're not involved. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. Just recently, on the local level, because of the horrendous things that are happening in Palestine, we've had people come forward who wanted to get our local government to petition the federal government, as several other localities have, both in this state and in other states, regarding ending the war in Gaza as soon as possible. And when this was brought to our local council, to the Keene City Council, the mayor, Jay Kahn, and several others talked about this, and the decision was made that no, this was not a local issue, and so this should not be spoken. We should not come up with some kind of a declaration of any part on the city's side, and that even they were actually trying to say, we don't really need to talk about this. What you need to do is bring your concerns to the council, to individual councilors, and they'll talk about it. And if they decide it's really worthy of or in our purview, then we'll do this. All of this is really denying free speech, and several people who brought this concern and came to the council with it have written letters since, good letters to the editor, in which they pointed that out. They not only pointed out that actually the council did weigh in on other international issues previously, but that denying it at this point, when something so horrendous as this is happening, is really denying free speech.
Well, it's a perfect example,
Yeah.
a hyper-local one of how free speech is denied. And
Yeah.
one of the things Mike Benz talks about, he's a former State Department official, is that much of the censorship effort that is going on right now is an attempt to squash popularism, or whether it's coming from the left or the right. We saw what happened to Bernie Sanders in the last couple of elections. The DNC was not going to let him talk and or get a foothold, and we've seen what's happened to others. So when Brexit happened, for example, it's like people there were roundly attacked for allowing that to happen. So,
and I think people don't really. There's so many issues involved here. There's our basic humanity, and that everybody needs to feel somehow that we're comfortable with what our government is doing in these big situations. And nobody feels comfortable with this,
No.
with Ukraine or in Gaza. And the other thing is the amount of money we're spending on this. That we haven't got boots on the ground in some of these places, but gosh, we're spending money that we could use in so much better ways.
Yeah.
And everybody agrees with that. Both sides of the aisle
Yeah.
agree with that.
Yeah.
So the fact that we're not talking about these issues, that we're not supposed to, that speech is supposed to be limited, this makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
This really doesn't. Yeah.
Well, it's worth mentioning too that
Yeah.
the DNC did not allow any Palestinian American on stage at the Democratic National
Yeah.
Convention.
Yeah.
And that would have been one way to at least allow a voice to speak about what was being experienced.
But you know what did happen? That there has since been at least one very prominent person who has backed off who said, because the Palestinians, just the tenor of what was said at that convention, and that was that was his famous lawyer, who said, I'm not going to support the Democrats anymore. I'm through with them. And that it was a famous Jewish lawyer who decided that you have to completely be with us or you're against us.
Was that Dershowitz?
That was Dershowitz.
Okay.
Dershowitz, yeah. He said, I'm
That's
quitting
right. That's right.
quitting the Democratic Party.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
they didn't even have, as you say, somebody presenting that point of view. You had to go. I think they had a little. They had a conference. One of the workshops they did was
Right.
on the Palestinians. But you didn't have to go to that. So
Well, it's interesting coming
Right.
from him because he famously said during COVID that the government had the right to put a needle in your arm. Yes.
Whoa.
So that but
Yeah.
people are coming around. Maybe they're deciding. I think he backed off from that when
I would hope so.
after he talked to a few people. I do want to also just briefly mention that Barack Obama, former president, also has been pushing for further censorship. I mean, he's
Yeah.
talking about things that people should be concerned about, such as deep fakes and global extremism. But he and a lot of his ilk and a lot of people in the Biden administration have been responsible for just so much suppression of information over the last several years. Again, it's an appeal to a world based international rules based order is what they're pushing for, and they see free speech as a problem with that, and it's something that they were pushing in 2014 and earlier,
Yes, they've been
as
pushing
well
for
as
quite
later,
some
because
time,
it
yeah.
helped them marshal support for opposition in other countries where they were trying to topple governments, which is we know the CIA and has done for many decades.
But we also know that our military, has been looking at China for many years now, and seeing how effective it is when you have that kind of censorship and control of the populace in China.
Yes.
In terms of making your goals go forward without any problems.
Well, I mean, what
So-
would you expect from a top-down organization?
Yeah, like the military,
hell-bent on maintaining the need for it to happen. So,
Yeah.
Do you want to go on with Germany?
Yeah, so in Germany, now Germany is an interesting question because, of course, Germany is a fairly recent democracy, but they have and their constitution is called the Basic Law, but they have a guarantee for freedom of expression. I'll read this to you. Every person shall have the right freely to express and disseminate his opinions in speech, writing, and pictures, and to inform himself without hindrance from generally accessible sources. Freedom of the press and freedom from reporting by means of broadcasts and films shall be guaranteed. There shall be no censorship. Now that sounds pretty darn good, doesn't it? However, there are limitations. Once again, they did not say that the government couldn't step in when it needed to. So here we go. The limitations, they have something, for instance, they have a law about anti-constitutional speech. Germany bans speech which is considered anti-constitutional, particularly targeting Nazism, neo-Nazism, and certain forms of communism. And the idea was that this was going to prevent the rise of anti-democratic movements. Well, of course, you realize all of this has to do with Germany as it was reestablished after World War II, because part of our agreement with Germany when we came up with the Marshall Plan, we decided we were going to help Germany become a 21st century country, was that they had to abrogate all allegiance to Nazism, could never speak of Nazism again, it would never rear its ugly head, and we probably threw communism in there along the way because we didn't like the communists either. So this is why that kind of thing is in place. Also, they have a Holocaust denial law, which says that anybody caught denying or trivializing the Holocaust is a criminal offense in Germany, punishable up to 5 years in prison.
And that includes anyone actually questioning any aspect of that narrative, even
right.
just trying to clarify,
right.
Or bring new information to light. Right?
So people have gone to jail, including there's a woman by the name of Ursula Haverbeck, who is now in her 90s, who's gone to jail numerous times because she refuses to stop bringing up points that she has not received clarification on. And as a good German, she says, I've been to the records. There are no records. If there are no records, that means they didn't do it, or they didn't do it in the way they said they did. So anyway, but so also hate speech. You cannot incite hate speech in Germany. And they have something brand new. I think it was just this year, called the Netz DG law, which it has to do with the internet. And this law is pretty draconian. I think it's the most draconian law that's come out so far by a country. It requires social media companies to remove hate speech and other illegal content quickly or face steep fines. And they're talking about like 50,000 euros. And you have to remove it within 24 hours. So no other country has quite done that. And what they're pointing out is that this is now a template for other countries. Some 13 other countries are creating new hate speeches based on the German law. However, there's lots of pushback in Germany. Germans, not all Germans are on board with this. And in fact, some of the people who were on board with it to begin with are not now. Some of the major parties,
right.
And certainly the right parties, because that's primarily, they've been the major targets of it.
Yeah.
But even left parties, the Greens, just this week, there's a Green MP he's actually for further. He says we must. He wants to take it farther. He wants to ban X. So anyway, and he's not doing very well in the polls. So he's not representing a lot of people right now.
No, there's actually been a sea change in German politics, and the quote-unquote far-right AfD has gotten a lot of power now because mostly as a reaction to a lot of this kind of suppression.
But they're also doing what we do. There's another article I read here about a citizens' council calling for criminalization of disinformation. They don't say who these citizens are. It's probably a bunch of people they've pulled together who look like they're representative, but maybe they're, who knows, because they don't say, So I mean, the government and this, and also another thing about this is that this Citizens Council is backed by the Bertelsmann Foundation, which is a very influential public policy think tank in Germany, and so like the think tanks here, it's likely that it's pushing this international agenda. So
and it's worth pointing out that German citizens, I think only about 17% of German citizens feel free to speak their minds in public. You believe that?
Yeah.
I mean that is a wholesale proof that this is not the right approach anyways.
No,
We're going to have to kind of, I think, move things along here because we got a lot we want to cover here. People probably know about Brazil really clamping down on free speech. They essentially kicked X out of their country in a way, and the judge in the case, Judge Moraes, threatened the X's legal representative with imprisonment and froze all of X's bank accounts. They're doing a lot more to essentially criminalize free speech there on other platforms as well. And then, did you want to talk about what England is doing currently?
Yeah, well, in England, so there is a new law in England. Let me pull this up just a second here.
while you're looking for that, let me
okay.
just mention.
Okay, yeah, right,
There was
okay.
a highly placed person, it was
Yeah,
Thierry, I think it was, who, before Musk interviewed President Trump last month, whenever it was, said, that, he tried to pre-censor the entire thing, said you should be able to talk and let anything be put online. Now the EU later came out and said, we don't necessarily agree with that, but it's worth mentioning.
yeah, no. So they count a lot in Britain on self-censorship. The press does that a lot because and they're considering right now an online safety bill, which would require the platforms, probably based somewhat on what Germany's doing, to remove harmful content. But there are a lot of critics of that. But there is this other one that a second. Okay, here.
Didn't they throw people in jail recently too?
Yes, they have because
For what do you remember what it was for? It was
it was because they. And this also is a censorship law. They feel that what is being said online is inciting danger, inciting these riots and whatnot.
Right.
And so they simply gather people up and stick them in jail.
This is after the riots.
This is after the riots. After the riots.
And then they claim.
And then they claim. You see, it's because of what people are talking about online.
And that was after the murder of a girl, right, by a Senegalese man or somebody.
It turns out that was some false information too. The person who actually killed her was not the person who killed her.
Initially, they thought it was from a Muslim, but it ended up
and it wasn't a Muslim.
Right,
apparently. It was not a Muslim.
Somebody from Central Africa.
Yeah. Right, but so they're concerned about freedom in academia as well. But there is this particular law that's coming up that they passed this year, and they're going to. I'm just trying to get the name of it, but basically, it was a censorship law, going to censor the online platforms, and also was going to censor. Another law was going to censor people in academia, and there's been a lot of pushback against it. So I think it's kind of in flux right now as to whether this is going to go through, going to stay like this, or it's going to be reworked. I mean, when enough Brits stand up and say, "Okay, we don't want this," then there's a lot of fight about it. So it isn't definite that it's going to be like Germany's law yet, but it's trying to be.
Right,
it's trying to be. So
right.
yeah.
I have another example from Bow, New Hampshire, very recently. People may be aware of this, but that soccer parents coming to the games were wearing pink wristbands with the letters XX on them to indicate girls. And as a statement of supporting girls-only sports, we're not going to get into this large conversation about whether trans women should be allowed in women's sports. I don't believe they should, because if they were born with XY, then they have a different physiology. Anyways, but parents who were wearing, at least two parents who were wearing those armbands, were slapped with a no trespassing order by the superintendent of schools, meaning they can't attend future games. Can you believe that?
No.
So I know that's an ongoing thing, and hopefully that'll get.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have the right to wear a wristband. Again, that's an example of you're hating on trans people. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Is it? How about hating on all the girls who want just the right to to participate and compete against other girls? So it's it's a much larger conversation. I don't want to trivialize it. And there should be a place for trans women and trans men to be able to participate in sports. I'm not saying they shouldn't.
But it's so that's one of these really tricky situations. You've got to deal with this in much broader. You have to really look at the specifics and the individual people, and
And it's not going to help if you just tell people they can't talk about it or can't protest about it. So let me just briefly, as we're talking about schools, I'll briefly talk about free speech on campus. We all know this has been a pretty big issue with multiple schools having groups of students, shout down people trying to talk from outside because they didn't agree with their viewpoint. This has happened on multiple campuses around the country. It's actually come to the point of violence in some cases, and it resulted in legal battles. There's article on Substack by a man named Alex Arnold called "Free Speech Ain't Enough." His Substack is called Free the Inquiry. He argues that while free speech is critical in universities, it is insufficient to fulfill education's true purpose, which is to find truth, and that universities should be places of rigorous inquiry into multiple viewpoints. I think he's connected with the Heterodox Academy, which was founded by Jonathan Haidt and a few others to promote viewpoint diversity on campus. So that's a good thing. He instead says that universities need to cultivate virtues like intellectual humility, curiosity, charity, and that they should, go beyond merely protecting free speech and actively foster an environment where diverse perspectives are sought out and critically examined. So he said that universities should be a furnace that refines ideas rather than a megaphone that simply amplifies, the official narrative of things that we're going to accept. So those are an example of quite a bit. We could go on and on. We could go on for days and talking about how free speech is being attacked. But let's call that adequate. So we're going to go into a little bit of discussion of free speech, and I want to just talk about this notion of clear and present danger. I listened in on a interesting conversation last night at the Brattleboro Public Library. People can check out the video there. It was from last night, which would have been the 25th, I guess, by Meg Mott. She led a conversation. There may be about 60 or 70 people there, but she's a professor emerita from Emerson College, and also I think town moderator in Putney, Vermont. And she talked about there having been numerous Supreme Court decisions over the course of the country's history where free speech was abridged, and they would always appeal to free speech being a clear and present danger, often used against socialists and communists who were mitigating for different political views. Probably the most famous case is Eugene Debs, who in 1917 was arguing against the draft, saying that people who signed up are signing up to be cannon fodder. And that went before the Supreme Court, and he got a 10-year jail sentence. He only served 3 years, but they said that was interrupting the war effort and could reduce recruitment and could therefore hurt our chances. So that was interesting one that she brought up. And then we have this other one of this change in the Supreme Court in the 1960s when a KKK person named Clarence Brandenburg was prosecuted for something similar, basically saying, the white race is under attack, and we're not a revengeful was the word he used, organization, but if things don't change, we might have to, rethink our approach or something like that. And now I'm not agreeing with his views, and it's interesting that a black woman and a Jewish lawyer actually ended up representing him, I think, at the Supreme Court level. But the Supreme Court eventually sided with free speech in this particular case, saying that they did not prove an imminent lawless act was about to be committed based on what he said. So that has now sort of become the basis of determining, at least at one level, what free speech is. Although, as we've seen with the Supreme Court over the last year, there's still a lot of fuzziness on what the government can actually do. This is about people's free ability to speak freely, but the government, as we know, has been involved in many efforts, and that has really not been resolved. So this is, the clear and clear and present danger is part of the harm principle, which has been often cited as a reason to not allow completely free speech, not to have an absolutist approach. So obviously the more common example that we all hear is you can't shout fire in a crowded theater because that would create an imminent danger of people being trampled, as we know. Of course, it's been expanded to things like, well, we need to protect vulnerable groups. This is the whole hate speech area that you covered, which is similar here in the United States, and a lot of the cause of people being deplatformed and their posts being taken down. And then, of course, we have to recognize that the social media sphere has kind of worsened this because it's designed, the algorithms are designed to feed you back information that you already agree with, therefore creating these huge silos of people fighting each other, which may not be real, but seems real when you're in it and trying to argue with people. And of course, more recently and in the past, but misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is intentionally wrong information, and disinformation, which is intentional. The claim is they can have detrimental effects on society, such as undermining public trust in public health or democratic processes like elections. The problem there, of course, is who gets to decide what's misinformation and
Yes,
disinformation?
exactly.
And in too many instances,
Yeah.
it's information that the public should have and should have a right to talk about. So, that's.
And what the author of this article that was in the paper on Musk pointed out was that the online platforms, of course, their major focus is not whether the speech is correct. It's not. It's that they're there to make money and and so that allowing free speech for them just means making more money. And so his idea was that it shouldn't be free, because then everybody's heard, except for the only people who do well is the people who own the. But that's only one argument, and that's
it deserves to be argued.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm a free speech absolutist, but as we'll talk about shortly,
Yeah.
there are, and you already mentioned, there are already protections for that. So
Yeah.
I'll just mention one more here.
Yeah.
There's Karl Popper is known for the paradox of tolerance. It basically says that we need to be intolerant of intolerance. In other words, there is a space or there is a time to censor people whose level of intolerance may go beyond the ken, and really, again, it's sort of a hate speech argument. And he said that society will be destroyed if we let these people just say whatever they want, and so.
Well, of course, we thought early in our history here, we thought that too. But that was in the basis not to blaspheme or certain things were just beyond the pale. You couldn't say, and that's not true anymore.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, people were prosecuted earlier on.
For all kinds of things that are not anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So things certainly have changed, but as you mentioned, we already have protections. We're
We do.
kind of going some of the counter arguments. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Wait a minute. You mean in the Constitution?
Yeah, I mean,
that's it.
in practical terms,
Yeah.
if we don't need to necessarily continue with this track of censoring everybody because there are already protections.
Right. Well, we have laws against libel, and we have various other
direct incitement.
Yeah, and things laws that pertain to physical acts rather than speech. But in speech, there's libel and things like that. You can't say things are untrue about people. Of course, then you have to take it to court. I don't know how much the libel laws are used anymore, because it's expensive to go after somebody for.
There are. I've still seen a few defamation suits go through, but you really have to prove.
You'd have to prove it also.
You prove negative intent.
Right.
And then you have to kind of get around. Is this some kind of comedy?
Right.
Were you using it ironically?
That's it. If it's satire, then there's all these gray areas.
Exactly. Right? And comedy is dead is kind of another thing that we can talk about at some point. The English philosopher John Stuart Mill, in 1859 essay on liberty, introduced the harm principle that we've been talking about. But he also, interestingly, argued pretty strongly against using it and for the liberty of thought. He was one of the ones who thought that having debate could clarify what the truth was and what the highest good was. He felt that the collision of adverse opinions only sharpened our understanding of our convictions. He was also concerned about the tyranny of the majority in a majority kind of democratic culture, and how the in-group could marginalize the out-groups. So
are we in this country. Very concerned about the tyranny of the majority. Yeah. But so John Milton, in his 1644 Areopagitica speech before the Parliament of England, argued against censorship, asserting the truth and the false should wrestle freely in the marketplace of ideas. He believed the truth would inevitably emerge victorious. So, therefore, even harmful ideas should be openly debated rather than suppressed. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jonathan Turley, we've already mentioned.
Yeah.
Here's a quote from him: "Free speech's benefits go beyond the political. It honors our inherent dignity as social and political animals who reason, speak, make moral judgments, create and pursue happiness." So he's kind of making even a broader argument there that we need it to be able to do these things. He's in his book, The Indispensable Right. He talks about a lot of examples throughout history. It's a really worthwhile read. Including examples from COVID that we know. A lot of the things that were suppressed in the early years of COVID ended up being true, absolutely true, and they were called falsehoods. And I'm not going to go through those right now.
He says that suppression of free speech always leads to greater societal harm. Certainly, COVID is an example of that.
Yeah, it's a perfect example.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So Nadine Strossen, former president of the ACLU, in her book, have you read her book, Hate, Why We Should Resist It with Free Speech, Not Censorship?
I have not read that.
Okay. Argues that the best way to counteract hate speech is not through censorship, but through counter-speech, education, and activism. I can see this coming from the ACLU, because they've always stood up for...
Until recently.
Until right. Until
Right.
perhaps COVID.
Right. Oh, no,
Yeah.
Yeah, the KKK one being probably the most, supreme example.
Yeah. Yeah, so it says, in an interview with Dartmouth College Radio, Professor Strawson said in her law classes, she insists all students argue all possible and plausible perspectives. If they advocate one view, I make them turn around and advocate the opposite view. That's a good idea. You can't be an effective lawyer without doing that. Nobody has a legal duty to engage in dialogue. We have a moral obligation to ourselves and to our community. She went on to say that freedom of speech is the greatest ally for social justice and censorship is the greatest enemy. So I can see that coming from ACLU.
Exactly.
I mean, always take the other person's point of view, because that's actually just a wonderful principle anyway.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. How can you be heard otherwise?
And how can you really understand anybody unless you can actually put yourself in their shoes?
Yes.
So.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So another counter argument, of course, is the slippery slope argument. We kind of mentioned this. You start limiting free speech in one area. It starts to go away in other areas, and then the question again that we asked earlier: who has the power to do so? And it's people in power, typically with something to hide, who have usually the levers of the state, whether it's the Department of Justice or the police, whatever, to make you pay if you don't do it. So it's the means of controlling speech will always accrue to those in power, and that's what we exactly saw during COVID, and still see it now. They're still controlling free speech. In fact, and the media is still touting
pushing. They're still pushing people get vaccinated.
Like yesterday, there was a.
How can they do that?
Yesterday, there was a roundtable in the Senate by Ron Johnson talking about children's health. RFK Jr. was there, and others were there. Well, the Atlantic came out with an article this morning called "Woo Woo in the Senate." So it's like, again, it's another example of ridicule is a very common tactic that they use to make to signal to their party and to everyone who cares that this is the standard party line. Everyone's going to
don't listen because this is just
and we'll ridicule you if you do.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Right. So now I'm not familiar with this one, but the Streisand effect. I don't remember this. Do you remember what happened with Barbra Streisand?
So yeah, the Streisand effect is it's when censorship attempts backfire. It's when Barbra Streisand tried to prevent people from seeing a picture of her house. I guess she tried to get that picture removed, and it ended up creating a lot more interest. It's similar. It's similar as we've seen.
They really wanted to see it.
Some of the book banning. It's like all of a sudden everyone wants to read those books.
Right.
It's kind of not working.
Yeah. So they have to be careful about that.
Yes.
Then the underground effect. Suppressing viewpoints does not eradicate those who. It pushes them underground. Yes, we know that, where they can even become more dangerous, because people they get madder, and they're more sneaky, and
Yeah.
all the things that if they could actually talk about what it was that was bothering them, this might actually solve the problem.
Yeah, imagine
But-
if you could sort of
Yeah.
constructively engage in what the issues
Yeah.
were, and not just to say they're there, but to
Yeah.
actually say we care what you think and we'll
Yeah.
consider it in our policies.
A good example of that, really, coming up, and I don't know if we're going to talk about politics next time, but is the in the 2020 election, which Trump and others, and actually I'm of the opinion myself that it was indeed stolen, and that election, and that there was a lot of, but it was that whole scenario was suppressed. And because all of the attempts he made to bring it to court were dismissed because of standing, not because of the argument of that any of this
they
was true or
didn't have
not.
an opportunity to go into discovery
did
to
not.
actually present the
And
evidence.
so
yeah.
they did not have an opportunity to discuss it.
Yeah.
And that's why, because Democrats say, why are they hanging on to this? Why do the Republicans care about this? It's because nobody really gave them a chance to talk about it at all.
Yeah, and that then
And-
led to January 6th,
And it
which
led
is
to
another
yes,
whole
yeah.
ball of wax.
Yeah.
Well, the point I want to make is,
Yeah.
for this conversation,
Yeah.
Johanna, is that perfect protection from harms
Yeah.
is actually a dangerous myth. We don't live in a perfect world. No one is
Yeah.
going to be completely protected from being slighted.
Yeah. Right.
The slings and arrows kind of outrageous fortune. That's part of how we, as a democratic government, or Democratic Republic, that's how we do business. And RFK Jr. said the First Amendment wasn't meant for easy speech. It was written for speech nobody likes you for.
Right. Yeah.
And Jonathan Turley said the true test of one's commitment to free speech comes when we defend the rights of speakers with whom we vehemently disagree.
Yeah.
It's easy to defend speech we like. It's the challenge lies in protecting the speech we loathe.
Loathe.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Very true. Yeah, and so what somehow is being created if we don't do this is an ideological monoculture in which there's only one right way to think about things and everything else is the wrong way to think about things.
Yeah.
But this is not democracy, and this is certainly not America.
And it's not rational.
And it isn't even rational.
It's not rational. The idea that there's just one truth and we're going to tell you
Right.
what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, people should be suspicious of
Yeah.
what's coming out of the mouths of government
You think.
and corporations. They
Yeah.
should.
Yeah.
But
And they were. When you think back to the 1970s, when that whole business of people, citizens bringing lawsuits against corporations for harms that they'd caused, physical and mental and all sorts of things, and they went through, and the corporations got sued big time, and it actually made a difference.
Yeah.
None of that is happening
Yeah.
today. None of that's
So this
happening.
leads us back around to the new commons, which is
Yeah.
this, if we want to
Yeah.
create literally a new space for people to be able to feel safe, to come forward, it can't be by controlling the things that they say. We need respectful communication and constructive disagreement. We need to be able to do that.
We do. Yeah. We need to listen to each other. We need to ask questions more than we give answers, because we really want to hear the other person's point of view.
Yeah, we need to be able to steelman each other's points of view, which is if you say something to me that I don't disagree with, I listen sufficiently, and then I speak back to you what you've said,
Uh-huh.
and you get to say, yes, you heard me, or no,
Okay.
that's not what I meant.
All right.
Steelmanning
Yes,
is
that's what that is. Okay.
Yeah, it's being able to,
Yeah.
essentially indicate to the other person you've heard what they've said and you understand, and
Yeah.
you're not ridiculing them while you're
Right.
doing it,
No.
and while they're talking, you're not going,
Yeah, right.
Right.
I'm not
that's-
saying you're a
that's just crazy.
Tinfoil hat.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then we've got avoiding logical fallacies.
Yeah, I mean, you just-
can't. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be able to
Yeah.
understand that if you're attacking the person, which is called an ad hominem logical fallacy, then you're not engaging on the basis of the content,
Right.
but you're
Yeah.
engaging. You're trying to. You don't have an argument, so I'll say, well, I don't agree with what Johanna says, so she must be this racist, homophobe, wild right winger or left wing extremist or whatever the epithet of the day is to marginalize you, so that when other people hear
What
me
you say,
saying that, it's
that's
like
what they think.
It's
That's
like,
what they
she must be like that Charlie Brown character, with the cloud always falling. I better give him wide berth.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. An example example of somebody who really listened well was Daryl Davis.
Yeah.
Do you remember him?
No. I don't.
During, I think it was in the 70s, he's a black musician who engaged directly with the KKK. He like sought them out and said,
yeah.
"Hey, I'd like to talk to you about what you," and he didn't go into it with like, "I'm going to change your mind." He's like, "Why
Yeah.
do you think the way you think?"
Yeah.
And he told them about the history of black music and how that music had certainly inspired what we know for, as you know, a lot of the modern streams of music. So, you know, going up through our, you know, hip hop and, you know, earlier rock and roll and
Some things they probably like.
blues before that, jazz. And so eventually he won a lot of them over,
Yeah.
not by saying you're a bad person or by trying to control their speech. People hung up their robes, and he actually collected the robes,
Huh.
the KKK
Wow.
robes.
I didn't. I
Yeah,
never
yeah,
heard that. I
yeah,
never
yeah.
heard of that. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're just about out of time
Yeah,
here.
right, I know.
So, you know, I just want to say that this,
Yeah.
you know, the spirit of this kind of dialogue involves, you know, a spirit of goodwill towards the other person, curiosity. Well, why is it that you think that?
Yeah.
Rather than, I can't believe you think that. That
Yeah.
you must be in league with, you know,
So-and-so.
whoever the dispossessed person of the day is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, imagine someone
Yeah.
coming to your house,
Yeah.
papering over your windows, coming in your house, putting a blindfold on you, putting earplugs in your ears,
Taping up your mouth.
and put tape on your mouth. Who has the right to do that? Does anybody have the right to do that?
Nobody, no.
And you know, in extreme examples, like you said, we already have laws on the books for that. In extreme examples, yes, I'm not for people, you know, inciting violence to other groups of people. I'm not for that. So but you know, what qualifies as that? I don't know. Do you want to read that Nadine Strassen quote? Right up here at the top.
Okay. Oh. Search for common ground and listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should do even more listening than we do talking. People do not hear the ideas that speakers they think they're going to disagree with have to offer, therefore depriving themselves of very valuable education opportunities.
Exactly.
So true.
Right. So we have a lot to learn from each other, and I
Yes.
hope that, you know,
Yeah.
this kind of program can help stimulate that kind of willingness
That was
to
our
listen.
idea with
Yeah.
founding this program to
Let's-
begin with.
let's
right?
talk.
So,
Let's
let's
talk.
talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John Michael.
Thank you.